I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to my channel. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Also hit the thumbs up, the like, and hit the bell for notifications so you are alerted anytime I go live or post new videos, which I'm going to try to do more of. A lot of people have told me they want more of the self-contained videos. So today I'm going to talk about the arrest of Bryan Kohberger. This all went down on December 30th of 2022 in the very early morning hours. And we're getting a lot of new insight into what happened, thanks to the release of a lot of these Moscow Police Department documents. And Bryan Kohberger was in the sights of the Moscow Police Department and the Pennsylvania State Police and the FBI, who conducted the genetic genealogy work in this case to identify him as the suspect in the murders of Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Now, a lot of what I'm going to tell you about comes from this newly released police report, but some of what I'm going to tell you about, we heard about in a hearing that took place in Ada County not too long ago, back in April, I believe, might have even been March, but Brett Payne and Lawrence Mowry, they were two of the detectives or the two of the people from Moscow PD who were on the stand answering questions about this. Mostly it was Brett Payne, who I've learned now is no longer employed by the Moscow Police Department. He's now working for the University of Idaho in a non-law enforcement position. So here's what happened. On December 19th of 2022, the FBI called the Moscow Police Department and said, "Hey, we're done with our IgG work and we have a name for you. You need to look at this guy. His name is Bryan Kohberger." So they immediately get to work and they start looking up information about this graduate student, Bryan Kohberger, and they see that he attends Washington State University and that he was a criminology PhD student. They pull up his photograph and they see that he's got the bushy eyebrows described by Dylan Mortensen, and they go to work trying to track him down. They've got to figure out, where is this guy? And they figure out that he has driven home to Pennsylvania for the holidays. They query his name and they see that his car kind of went through Colorado. I've actually spoken to the police chief of Moscow, and he said if they had known that was their guy before December 19th, they would have never let him leave the area. That wouldn't have happened. So they had no word about Bryan Kohberger. He was not on their radar prior to December 19th, 2022, when the FBI called and said, "Take a look at Bryan Kohberger." So what do? They start surveilling Bryan Kohberger. They need to collect more information in order to get an arrest warrant. And so they send the FBI, Pennsylvania State Police, they dispatch them, and they start surveilling Bryan Kohberger. And they see him going into stores. He's going into stores wearing gloves, very strange behavior, running around grocery stores, any other types of stores in Pennsylvania wearing gloves. He's taking his trash, as you've heard before, putting it in neighbors' trash cans, things of that nature. Really weird stuff. So what they do is they get a Q-tip. They pull the trash. They enlist the help of, the trash company, and they pull the trash from the Kohberger residence, and they pull a Q-tip out of there. And they get a Q-tip and they fly this trash to the Idaho State Police Crime Lab. And the Q-tip, they test the DNA on the Q-tip, and the DNA people at the lab say, "Hey, this is basically the father. The DNA on this Q-tip is the father of the person with the DNA on the knife sheath." So there they go. They're like, that's enough for a warrant. So December 29th, 2022, Brett Payne and Darren Gilbertson is the lieutenant with the Idaho State Police. They're the lead detectives on the case. They fly out to Pennsylvania for the arrest. And Pennsylvania State Police, they kind of scramble to their jets, literally. They get the Pennsylvania State Police plane. They get it up in the air. They have it circling the house of the Kohberger family. And we know from prior testimony by Corporal Payne that he could actually see Bryan Kohberger through the window of the home. And they could see them because they had a drone. They had a drone kind of buzzing around. and they could see inside the window of the home, and they could see him in there with a black hoodie on, and they could see him kind of looking through the sliding glass door of the back of his parents' house. And there was a Pennsylvania State Police plane circling above. Okay. So maybe that was making some noise and causing him a certain level of concern, because he's thinking, what's going on? Why is there a plane flying above my parents' house? Like, what's the deal? Are they coming for me? He was probably freaked out. We also know from this hearing earlier this year that Kohberger, they could see him going into the garage, and they could see, there was like the key fob. He was operating his key fob, and, they were seeing the lights. You know how you do the key fob and you open you're doing it to like unlock the door or whatever. They could see the lights coming in on and off in the vehicle. So they're apparently worried that he's destroying evidence, that he's going out into the vehicle to possibly destroy evidence. So that's concerning to them. So they see him going back and forth from the garage to the kitchen, and they see him going to the sliding glass door, looking out back as the Pennsylvania State Police plane is circling overhead. And they see all this, of course, because they've got the drone, and then they've got eyes on him as well. I'm assuming they had binoculars and things of that sort. So they decide, we got to move in. They were going to do, like a knock and announce or whatever. They couldn't just do a regular warrant. They had to do like basically move in, exigent circumstances, move in, do a brief announce, and then just boom, go in there and get him. And so that's what they did. And yet he was wearing the gloves again. He's wearing the gloves. And so they bust in the door, and Bryan Kohberger starts running for his bedroom. And they're thinking to themselves, okay, so he's running toward his bedroom. There was a firearm in his bedroom, so we don't know if he was running for that or if he's just running because he's scared or what. We also know from that hearing earlier this year that his parents, during this, this is a raid, right? This is a raid for somebody. It's the execution of an arrest warrant, but it's essentially a raid. This is somebody who, at this time, is their suspect in a brutal quadruple homicide. So, they're taking all precautions. They don't know what they're running into. So the parents are placed in zip ties. You just don't know what's going to happen. And this is pretty much standard protocol. So the parents are on the floor and placed in zip ties because they have to make sure everything in the house before they do anything else is secure, and they have to sweep it. So they get Bryan Kohberger and they take him into custody, and they take him to the Pennsylvania State Police barracks. Before that happens, though, he's sitting in the vehicle, and I remember this very clearly, that it was in the court documents as well. And his defense attorney said, this is part of his level 1 autism diagnosis, that he doesn't pick up on social cues. He's socially awkward, things of that nature. And he doesn't really ask questions about, hey, what's going on here or anything like that. But he did say to the officers, well, hey, maybe once this is over, we can go out and get coffee sometime. So that happened at some point during this arrest, likely when he's in the police cruiser. But then they take him down to the Pennsylvania State Police barracks to question him. And I remember reporting this back in 2023 and it might have even been late 2022, after talking to his Monroe County public defender, Jason Labar, who said, he met with Bryan Kohberger, and Bryan Kohberger did ask for a lawyer after speaking with police very briefly. And he said that Bryan Kohberger told him he looked forward to being exonerated. That's what, Jason Labar told me back then. So let's move on now to the actual report detailing the conversation between Brett Payne and Darren Gilbertson and Bryan Kohberger. And this is down at the Pennsylvania State Police barracks. And it's around 2 a.m. at this point on December 30th when this conversation is taking place. Kohberger was brought to the PSP Stroudsburg Barracks and placed in an interview room. The interview was recorded on the built-in video system at the barracks, as well as Detective Gilbertson's pocket recorder. So we know we have recordings of this. Detective Gilbertson and I were the interviewers present. This is a summary of our interview. Detective Gilbertson and I began, so this is Brett Payne's report, by introducing ourselves and stating which agencies we represented. When I stated who I was, Kohberger stated, "You do look familiar." Detective Gilbertson and I prepared our note-taking materials, and Detective Gilbertson read Kohberger his Miranda rights advisement. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he understood his rights, to which he replied that he most certainly did. After collecting Kohberger's personal information and inquiring about any medications, Detective Gilbertson and I began to speak to Kohberger. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger about the SWAT operation at the house, to which Kohberger replied he was concerned about his parents and he was also concerned about his dog. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he was going to Washington State University, to which he replied he was. We made small talk with Kohberger about sports for some time, and he stated he didn't really follow WSU football, but he was a baseball fan. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he had only been at WSU for one semester, and he confirmed this and said he came there with his father on July 1st. Kohberger then went on to say he was a first-year PhD student in criminal justice and criminology. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger what the process was to apply for a PhD, and he stated he applied at two places, UC Irvine and WSU, and he said he was going to graduate with his master's in criminal justice from DeSales, and was inspired. So that's very key. He was inspired to go forward in his education, he claims. I'm assuming in his education, he could have been inspired in another way by his studies at DeSales. Kohberger then asked if it was okay to engage in small talk like we were, to which he replied that it was. After briefly mentioning he was strengthened by the fact his mother and father were okay, he said that he applied to the two aforementioned schools because they did not require the GRE exam, which is an exam that you have to take in order to pass and get a certain score to make it into some schools. So that's kind of making me wonder right there about how smart he actually is, because some schools do require that, but apparently these two did not. Kohberger then spoke about the GRE for a brief time and said he was accepted by WSU. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger what led him down the road of becoming a professor. Kohberger stated it was because he loved being in college and stated knowledge was more important to him than money. Kohberger added WSU had a good program to study under, and then he said, "You guys know all about this more than likely." It was interesting. Kohberger then asked questions about the University of Idaho and other Idaho universities before stating he didn't know much about Idaho or Washington and had not left the tri-state area much. Kohberger then returned to speaking about his focus on learning and how he thought he could obtain his doctorate degree. Kohberger then said he recently returned home to see his family. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about his time at DeSales University, and Kohberger spoke for some time about his time at Northampton Community College in DeSales. Kohberger then spoke about how he became interested in criminal justice, and he thought about being a police officer, but didn't want to make the commitment unless he was absolutely sure that that's the route he wanted to take. And he continued to speak about his education and universities. He also spoke more about the process to get into a PhD program and how competitive that it can be. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about his move to Washington, and Kohberger said he drove across the country and wanted the challenge of driving cross country and experiencing it with his father. Kohberger then said he took a different route back home with his father for Christmas break to avoid snow, which is very interesting because the route they took actually took them through Colorado, which you would think, really? You went through Colorado to avoid snow? So this doesn't make much sense to me. Kohberger spoke about his travels and the risks of such travels in winter. Kohberger then began to speak about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. We spoke about this for some time, and Kohberger said he was raised Christian, but was always a skeptic, except when confronted with the beauty of the natural world. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he had ever been to the Pacific Northwest prior to coming to WSU, and Kohberger said that he had not. I asked Kohberger if he and his father made any stops along their way to Pennsylvania, and he told me they visited Colorado, but the main goal was to just drive. Kohberger then told a story about seeing an unmarked police car near Kansas City speed up behind him, catch up to another vehicle, turn on its emergency lights, and then drive away. He thought this was strange and was unsure why it occurred. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about the job he mentioned, and Kohberger stated he was a teaching assistant. Now, this is interesting because he had been dismissed prior to this date. He had been dismissed from that position, I believe, on the 19th or 20th. So he's telling them that he was a teaching assistant still. Kohberger then talked about how busy he was and how the funding package that comes along with being a teaching assistant is what makes the extra work worth it. He then discussed ongoing projects with the WSU PD and the Pullman Police Department. Now, we know by now that Kohberger did not get those gigs. He did not get the internship with the Pullman Police Department that he applied for. Chief Jenkins turned him down. He didn't think he'd be a good fit. So I don't know what he's referring to here, unless he's just trying to say, hey, I do cop stuff and trying to impress the cops. Kohberger spoke more about how being a TA is more about essentially assisting the professors in the department, and he stated that he did not get to assist with teaching, with the exception of assisting with office hours. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he would be a TA again next semester, and Kohberger said that he would, so he lied. Kohberger knew at this point in time that he was not going to be a TA next semester, that he lost that gig. He knew that by this time, or at least should have, according to what we know. So this is very interesting. Kohberger then stated he understood why we were engaging in small talk, but would appreciate it if we explained to him why he was there. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger why he thought we were there, and he said he wanted Detective Gilbertson to tell him. Detective Gilbertson said we were there because of what occurred in Moscow, but he didn't provide any further detail. And you know why they're doing this? They're waiting to see if Kohberger will fill in the details, and if Kohberger will say something in response to that. They want to see what he'll say. He said he wanted Detective Gilbertson to tell him. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he watched the news, and Kohberger said, I watched the news. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger why he thought I looked familiar, and Kohberger said he wasn't sure and stated that I had a familiar face and looked like someone he used to know. Detective Gilbertson then said we were there because of what happened in November just off the University of Idaho campus. Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he knew what that was, to which Kohberger replied, of course. When prompted to elaborate, Kohberger said it was the incident we had been investigating for how long has it been? Kohberger said there were probably several incidents, and then said he was aware of a homicide because of a WSU alert he had received. Detective Gilbertson asked when Kohberger received the alert. Kohberger said he wasn't sure, but thought it was sometime the previous month. Gilbertson confirmed that was why they were there and asked Kohberger if he wanted to talk about it. And Kohberger replied, well, I think I would need a lawyer. Kohberger then asked if we would explain to him what we were there for specifically, and added he was tired. Detective Gilbertson again stated we were there investigating the homicides of the 4 students and that we had questions and things we hoped Kohberger would help us understand. So Kohberger sat back and he said he had the utmost respect for law enforcement, but stated it was a constitutional right to speak to an attorney. Detective Gilbertson affirmed this, and Kohberger then re-engaged and said the only thing he heard of from Moscow was an alert that came to his phone. Kohberger then said he wanted to talk to an attorney. Detective Gilbertson said we would stop now because Kohberger wanted to speak to an attorney. Kohberger then asked where his parents were and where his dog was. Kohberger re-engaged again and asked what questions we would have for him, and Gilbertson then asked him again if he understood his rights and asked specifically what Kohberger wished. Kohberger asked what specifically we wanted to talk to him about and the reason. And I told Kohberger he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and we were not going to ask him any further questions. And he asked again for the reason he was there, but added he would like to talk to an attorney. And at this point, we concluded our interview with Kohberger and left the room. So you might be asking yourself, what in this interview matters? Well, I think there's a lot that matters. Because if you were arrested and the cops plow into your home after midnight and put your parents on the floor and put them in zip ties and chase you through your house while you're wearing rubber gloves and you're running through your house, you're not stopping stunned. You're running through your house and you're outside looking because you hear the plane circling up above. Those are all things that are indicative of fear, being frightened. Of course, you're going to be frightened if the cops break down your door. But the things that Bryan Kohberger said in this interview, there's no shock. There's no surprise. There's no, what? Why are you handcuffing me? Why am I here? Like, what? You want to talk to me about Moscow? And there's no surprise. I mean, they said he was very calm. Now, his attorneys at trial would likely have said, if they had been permitted, well, this is somebody who just doesn't react. He doesn't offer a lot of emotion, and he's an intelligent guy, and but he is not reacting. Everything that I read to you here and explained to you, he is not reacting like somebody who had just had their house busted in and the door broken down and parents thrown on the floor and put into zip ties, who, isn't suspected of a crime. There's no shock and surprise that I'm sitting in an interview room. Like, why am I here? What are you doing to me? You think I have something to tell you about a quadruple homicide? There's none of that. I mean, he's a very calm guy. So there are things in there that I think that a jury would have looked at when that played in front of the jury that would have been telling, that would have raised some suspicion. Now, not everybody reacts the same to every incident or situation, but if you were a truly factually innocent person, you may be kind of thinking to yourself, what in the hell is going on here? Why am I in handcuffs? Like, why are you breaking down my parents' door? Like, why am I here? There is none of that from Bryan Kohberger. So it's as much what he didn't say as much as what he did say. And that's my take on that. Please let me know what you think of this video, and please give me that like button, hit the like and subscribe. I'm Anjanette Levy. Thanks so much for being here. I will see you back here another time. Until next time.